Hey everybody in Bowls, how are we doing today? Isendar, good to see you. Me. Oh, was there no sound at all? I had it where there was just music, so should not have quite had any sound quite yet, other than that. But if you weren't hearing that, then something wasn't quite right. Oh, okay. Maybe I need to turn up the music sound when I have just the desktop audio on. Let's adjust the camera distance here. Okay. And got our white balance. Alright, we're ready to rock and roll, I think. Oh yeah, I'm doing well. Yep. Alright, so we're going to start on today. We're going to keep working on this young Nephilim from Malifaux. And see what progress we can make with his blue skin. And maybe if we're lucky, maybe we can get to some of the other details. I don't know. But there's going to be a lot of other things we're going to work on today, so we might not quite get that far with him. So for his flesh tone, we started with some of the Fang. Now we're gonna have some of the Fang mixed with Fenrisian Gray, and that will give us our next color that we want to progress up to. So here we're just going to look for the raised areas. Start picking them out. Not going to worry too much about precise blending yet. I'm going to wait until we see how we like the highlights first. We are going to try to keep a little bit of the shading in areas like between these knuckles here. Just going to start out nice and thin, work our way up a little bit at a time. So here's a place where we're going to have to definitely blend things together later on. get some of the base shade color in there. Okay. Adjust the focus a bit. There we go. Okay. One other advantage people don't always mention when telling you about thinning your paints when applying them is that once you've got it on there, if it's nice and thin, you can also, once it's already on the model, you can push it around a bit, manipulate it after the fact, and try to move it more to where you want it. Because I had my first highlight color in this little recess, and I just sort of pushed it out, and I had it nice and thin enough where I could do that without really leaving any trace of it being there. Now, it doesn't mean that I won't have to go back with my shade color later, but I might not. I might not have to mess with it at all now. And you see this contour here, we definitely want to highlight that. And no, this is definitely not the brightest we're going to go with this. There's definitely a much lighter highlight coming, so... This highlight right here is actually pretty subtle. Yeah, that's what I had to do, Isendar. Remember those days? Yeah, and White Dwarf was not always the most dependable source for painting advice, because they went in phases where sometimes they would have really good painting tutorials and sometimes they didn't mention painting at all in White Dwarf, and it was very frustrating to have that lack of continuity. They're getting quite a bit better at it now, and actually like giving you things that are actually sort of difficult. They're not giving you all beginner stuff now in White Dwarf. I mean, there is a lot of beginner stuff, and that's a good thing for sure, but they actually have things now for intermediate and advanced painters, occasionally, that they can put to use. And that's something that, I think should never have been a question about whether or not it had a place in White Dwarf. And I don't know how it went for so long without it, but I am certainly glad it's there now. Yeah, yeah, and unfortunately, you know, when he stopped doing that regularly, you know, White Dwarf kind of lost a lot of value to me because I didn't really care about battle reports or, you know, what new minis were coming out, because everybody knew what new minis were coming out. Um, you know, I really wanted to see what they had to say about painting. And I think they had lost sight of the hobby aspect for way too long and are starting to finally regain what they had lost for so many years. And some old veterans who had been reading White Dwarf for a long time would tell you there was a phase where White Dwarf was no better than just an ad rag, is what people called it. But it has improved a whole lot. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. All they did was show you, yeah, I agree. Modern White Dwarf is a vast improvement. But yeah, when heavy metal just became, you know, a thing to show you people's models and didn't actually tell you anything about painting, I just lost interest in White Dwarf entirely for a long time. I mean, I was a person who had every issue since I had started playing the games, you know, going back for years, and then I just dropped it. I just stopped getting it, stopped even looking at it. Got a bad line here, so let's just have to be a little aggressive with it. But yeah, the publication's had its ups and downs over the years, but I think they're finally figuring out what their magazine needs to be about in order to really be relevant to people in the hobby. Wow, number 80. So you got started even before me. I think I was in the hundreds somewhere. I think. I can't remember. But I started in late second edition of 40K, not Fantasy. Fantasy, I think, was already in third or something like that by then. Started about the time that they came out with Epic 40K. I started just a little bit before that. Yeah, yeah. And hell, that leather technique that I started on my Death Guard came from a White Dwarf. And, yeah, we've got some really good results out of it. You just gotta We just got to work on being consistent with those results. And that'll just take some practice. Just going to work on the posterior here. Make sure this guy's ass is covered. Oh, really? Wow, day of release of Second Ed. Yeah, I got in when Second Ed was just starting to wind down. Because I think maybe 2 years after I started was when Third Ed came out. Not exactly sure how I want to do this highlight. Contours are a little strange. Let's try this way. Yeah. Oh god, I remember Second Ed, the box set where you had a million billion single pose grots with their little pointy helmets and their gigantic gun that was almost as big as they were. And the single pose orcs weren't a whole lot better either. And the orc boys that we use now, you know, were designed, God, you know, so long ago. They've really stood up the test of time. I actually want to stay with that and maybe not try to do any super strong highlights in that area. Just doesn't seem to really fit too well. Or maybe I'll have a better idea of how I want to do it once I get more of it finished. Oh, yes, yes. Yeah, the single pose Marines where you just stuck the bolter into 2 holes in their chest. Yep. Yeah, the second gen orc plastics, I mean, they're still used now, and back then they were just amazing. You know, and even now they're still, you know, more than adequate. Though, you know, I anticipate maybe in the next 5 or 10 years they're probably going to start looking pretty dated compared to the stuff they've been doing lately. But what has GW done when you need new orc models? Well, they put the old War Track into a box and are selling it again for like 3 or 4 times what it used to cost when it first came out. And I'm waiting for them to start selling the original Land Raider again for like $60. I think it used to come like a Land Raider and 2 Rhinos, I think for $18. Now, granted, back then, you know, the Land Raider kit was basically, you know, just looked like somebody's at-home styrene card hobby project that they did themselves to avoid having to buy a full tank kit. And that was your standard Land Raider. Came from the same age at which you were totally allowed to make a speeder out of an old deodorant stick and actually, you know, bring that into battle in 40K. Yeah, people who take Warhammer lore far too seriously need to remember that the first Inquisitor was Obi-Wan Sherlock Clouseau. But at the same time, you know, things have evolved pretty drastically since Rogue Trader, and that may be quite an understatement in and of itself, even using the word drastic. So yeah, the legs getting there. And yeah, I am taking quite a while with these guys, but being a Malifaux gang, there's only a handful of models, and so I want to take my time with them. Try to get the best results I can with them before I call them done. Because Malifaux is a game where you don't really have to have a whole lot of investment into the number of models you get. You can get even just a dozen models and have options to have several different, yeah, just like Necromunda gangs. Yeah, you have several different configurations you can make with a small number of models and be able to respond to a lot of different types of gameplay you may experience. So, you know, if you have something objective-based or assassination-based, or, you know, just try to cause the most casualties to the enemy gang as you can. There's different guys you can take in your gang to accomplish those, and have a lot of versatility, even just a dozen models. Right now I only have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. I have 11 right now, and I'm probably gonna when I get to 13, I'll probably have everything I need for just like running several different gang types that I have ideas for. So Malifaux is one of those games where you can definitely take your time and sort of go all out on each of your guys if you really want to. And, well, this one's going to take a little bit longer because he's also still sort of a prototype. I mean, we have an idea of how we want to do this blue skin. That's pretty set and done. But at the same time, we have not really executed it a whole lot yet. And so we have to get adjusted to some of the different issues it might run into. Also, it's been a while since I painted this much flesh on a guy, and so I gotta get back into the swing of that as well. Alright, let's just dab on here just to give us some of our extreme highlights. We'll add some to this as well, so we have a better notion of where our light source is coming from while we're doing other stuff. We'll work on making it neater as we go. You know, I'm not really sure. Honestly, for me, they're about the same. I actually have more trouble with weird flesh colors. Not because they are different from painting like, your standard flesh tones, but more it's because I have a harder time finding colors that pass for flesh tones when they're not, your typical fleshy colors that people expect. And so I spend a lot of time trying to figure out, you know, which blue actually will look like blue skin when I put it on something. Because, you know, there's some blues that will not work very well for that. And that's really what I run into. So for me, that's almost always one of my biggest problems is figuring out the right colors I want to use. And if I run into like a block of some kind, that's usually the reason why. Right now I'm just kind of picking out where I want my highlights, and I'll try to blend them a little more smoothly afterward. Yeah, I mean, it's definitely fun to paint something in a way that is not the norm. It still fits well with the theme of what you're working on. There's actually going to be some regular flesh tones in this Malifaux gang when we get to Lilith and Nekima. They're going to have much more normal flesh tones. We did a little bit of work on Nekima weeks ago, but I had to hit the reset button on it because I didn't like the way it was going. Not that it looked bad, but I wanted a more extreme difference between the shading and the highlight, and I just wasn't getting it. So we'll get around to her eventually, though, and we'll see what we get out of it. Oh, for the back? Yeah, I'm going to try to emphasize the features that are there, as, sort of not entirely as defined as they are in the front, of course. But yeah, I'm going to do what I can with them. Let's actually mess around with that, because the front is basically coming down to just blending now. So let's see if we can pick out the features that are back here and see how we can make them come together without making them too stark, but at the same time making sure that they show up at all. So here we're just going to do a rough first highlight. Well, the back's not terribly defined. I mean, your first observation was not wrong. I mean, there's definitely, indicators of muscle definition, but at the same time, they're not super distinct where they lend themselves to really drastic transitions. Yeah, well, I mean, they do get bigger when they get older. I mean, this is a young Nephilim, and here is your mature Nephilim, who I need to do some work on the back, because it's a little rough back there, but, yeah. This is the mature Nephilim. So, yeah, they do grow up into probably the biggest fleshy model in the game. Well, one of them, maybe not the biggest. But certainly not to be trifled with. Yeah, these precocious little scamps do bulk up at some point. In fact, in the game, they can bulk up very quickly if you have the right setup in your gang. So they can grow from these terror tots that you start the game with to a young Nephilim all the way to the mature Nephilim in the course of just a few turns if you slaughter your enemy's forces quickly enough and in the right way. Particularly if the Terror Tot or young Nephilim themselves can actually be the ones to secure the kill. But it's not necessary, not always necessary for that to be the case, but it certainly makes it easier. And in fact, in 2nd edition Malifaux, that was how I went. I went with what they called the grow build. Not necessarily. I mean, these are not named characters. For example, like named characters like Nekima and Lilith. They don't have any progressive changes in appearance or anything like that. That used to be a thing in late first edition, to an extent, because they had avatar modes, so your character could actually, if you bought the upgrade, they could eventually ramp up to where they could take on their avatar form, and that actually had a different model and different rules entirely. But when they came out with 2nd edition Malifaux, they got rid of that, realized it was probably a really bad idea for various reasons. And I don't necessarily disagree with them for getting rid of it. It wasn't the best thought out system. And I think going back to sort of the old way, where your masters for your gangs were pretty much the same throughout the whole fight, I think works out better. So to answer the question a little bit more specifically, Isendar, actually, the Terror Tots to young Nephilim to mature Nephilim is actually a pretty an example of a pretty rare mechanic in the game. There's actually very few models that transform into other models because of things that they do in the game. So in that way, the Nephilim are pretty unique. So most of the time when you play, when you put a model out in your gang, it will probably stay the way it is for the entirety of that game, you know, buffs notwithstanding. I'm just putting more of the base coat on here because these are not quite. Alright, let's hit these with a real highlight and see what we get. But yeah, they don't really progress from game to game like Necromunda can, you know, like a campaign. They may have introduced campaign rules since last I really paid attention, because I don't have a lot of the new books. But they probably don't include a lot of individual character progression. It's probably something more like bigger gangs or whatever. These are kind of extreme highlights we're doing on the spine. We'll tone them down later. You know, depending on what everything else looks like when we do this next highlight. But yeah, I mean, it's a game that really doesn't lend itself to that kind of mechanic where you have, you know, a minion that gains in power over time throughout the campaign. In fact, the Nephilim would be one of the few that actually could do that. But if you were to do that with any of them, it would really kind of probably break the game too quickly, because you would have some factions for which that would be of a negligible benefit, and some others where, you know, incremental gains in power would mean drastic differences that would make them way too strong way too quickly. So I don't think that Malifaux really lends itself well to that. But Malifaux also does have an RPG version, and that probably has something more suitable for that. But I've never really checked out the Malifaux RPG called, I think it's called Into the Breach. If I'm thinking about the right they're also working on a 28mm like actual, sort of like a Steampunk 40K game, and it's sort of based on, since Malifaux is sort of this world that humans have found, a portal to get into. This other tabletop war game is going to deal with the factions that are actually on Earth, not in Malifaux itself. So it's the same world, but it's, at least from the humans' point of view, but it's very different. It looks interesting, but, I'm not in a huge rush to go out and grab it. There's enough war games in that scale I've already invested in as it is. But at the same time, I don't know anything about what its gameplay will be like. So, never know. Could change my mind someday if it turns out to be really well made, really well designed. Alright, we'll see if this type of highlight works well for this. I'm not entirely convinced, but we're going to keep going with it for now. Oh yeah, that is true. Yeah, the flying steampunk dwarves definitely have that theme down pretty well. And it does make you kind of wonder if they kind of took a hint from the steampunk direction of a lot of other games have been going. Decided it was time to kind of throw their hat in the ring into the steampunk fray. Alright, let's try to bring these together a bit. Probably, but I'm not sure yet. I'll probably try it, and if I don't like it, then, switch it up to something else. Maybe something that complements the blue. But, maybe not a complement, because orange wing membranes would also look kind of weird. Especially if you're going for something really dark and sinister looking. But that's also why I'm tempted to stay with the blue, because I think it'll be easier to pull off the dark and sinister look if I sort of have some continuity there. But there he is so far. Getting some definition into his muscles, and yeah, that's true. Yep, something that's adjacent would definitely work. Green would probably take away from the dark look too much, but purple would work. Yep. Alright. Well, I think it's time to switch gears a little bit. I also need to work on the torso. Get that torso in there in the highlights, and we'll have a much better idea what this thing's going to shape up to look like. But yeah, I think it's time we switch to camouflage. Since after all, it is one of the major things that I wanted to get to today. So, things about camouflage on tanks. In some ways it's really easy, some ways it's not. One of the most difficult things is figuring out how you want to shade the tank. Yeah, well, I'll show you the first example I did, and there's actually a lot of changes I need to do to this one because the highlights ended up a little too obvious for me, and the shading toned down the main colors too much. So I'm actually going back and redoing this one. But we're really going to start with one that I've only really just begun on. Thanks, Isendar. Thank you for that. So, this one, though it seems pretty straightforward, actually can be one of the most difficult there is to do. And one of the reasons for that is that this vehicle, which is the Marder infantry fighting vehicle used by the West Germans, and probably a lot of other places now too, but this one in particular is from the 1980s and uses the NATO camouflage scheme. And the thing about that scheme is it's particular to each vehicle, or each type of vehicle. So every single Marder infantry fighting vehicle got the exact same camouflage paint job that was computed. It was designed by computation and was applied by machines. Not by hand, so only touch-ups and the like were actually done by hand. Hey, Kartoffelbauer, how are you doing? And for this, I really need to put a glove on because there's no base to hold on. Not bad, not bad. Just getting around to appropriately a German infantry fighting vehicle. So, and for this, because it actually had a very particular paint scheme, and we want to be somewhat historically accurate, we're actually going to use a template. And this is really where the difficulty is coming in. Is trying to match this template. Now, the hardest part is doing the first one, because after you've done one of these in a particular camouflage scheme, it's actually much easier to start applying it to other vehicles of the same type, because it's actually much easier to reference the first model you painted than it is to keep referencing the sheet of paper that I printed out that tells me what the design was. And so at first glance, it seems like something that would be pretty easy. It's essentially paint by numbers, right? well, there are a lot of unforeseen difficulties that come when you try to paint a camouflage scheme that has been imposed on you more than something that you just decided to sort of randomly apply on your own. Because you can totally do that. And if you're going to apply a camouflage scheme that you just, do yourself as you paint it, which is definitely appropriate for, say, like World War II, when there was no like prescribed template for camouflage patterns, more like just a guideline of what they should be trying to accomplish. And for those, the big thing is try to make them break up the outlines of the vehicles, because that's really what camouflage is trying to accomplish. But here we have a template, and I'm sorry, I'm trying to make sure we don't go too thick with this. Oh yeah, I do lots of different stuff, Kartoffel. In fact, I probably paint small-scale historicals more than anything, but or at least at the moment anyway. Mostly because I actually get these done a lot faster than I do 40K minis, which I'm sure you guys have known if you've been keeping up with me painting the Death Guard. I can definitely take quite a while on just one guy, particularly if they're a prototype. Well, I mean, this stream hasn't really been around that long, honestly. We've only been doing this, I believe, a few months now. When did we start? Was it November, December? Well, thanks, Kartoffel. I appreciate that. Hopefully, I will get faster at it, though, as I do those techniques more often. And we still have 2 guys left. Well, I mean, we still have all of them left. None of them are actually completely finished, but 2 of them are almost completely done. And then we can move on to this guy with the crazy, disgusting gun that oozes something no one wants to know the composition of. And then, Lord Felthius himself, who has not even been undercoated yet. Well, he has with Death Guard Green, but I need to redo it again with Mornfang Brown before we can really start on him. And he'll definitely be a lot of fun, but I'm also hoping he will go faster, since we'll already have a pretty good idea of how we want to paint him. Yeah. And when it comes to me, it takes me probably about 50 times as long to paint a Death Guard mini as it does to paint a Guardsman. So the ratio still works out, even in painting terms. And, just being slow and careful for now, for this first one. But I actually have 7 of this vehicle I need to paint. But the others will probably go a whole lot more quickly than this one will. I'm painting on this black gray, as it's called. It's not quite as fun as painting on the brown, which we're going to do some in just a minute. So, one of the things of painting a camouflaged miniature that is an important decision to make is, do you want to shade it a lot? How do you want to do your highlights on it? And how much are you willing for the colors that you applied to be altered in some way by any of those other processes? And not just, the colors you want to use for highlighting and shading, but also the techniques you want to use for highlighting and shading will have a big impact on what you get as a result in the end. And that may not seem like such a big deal for a miniature as small as this, but really it does have quite an impact. And honestly, for really any size of mini you're dealing with. And that's why I'm pretty confident in saying that any of these techniques you're seeing me apply to this vehicle can easily be applied to larger minis, say like 40K. Except for this, whole template stuff. Because I don't think any two guardsmen have ever painted a Leman Russ the same way. And I'm going to have to repeat this again when I start painting my Team Yankee U.S. Marines, because as a NATO force, they also used a template for all of their vehicles. However, that template will probably be a little bit easier to read than this one, because it's even though it's black and white, it's very well defined what needed to be painted, what color. So, and that's actually referencing an old Army field manual, not this handy little thing that Team Yankee had just put on their website. So that'll be interesting. I have to say, I have not had to read a field manual in a long time. Hey, what I assume that's Theater Nerd 221. Hello, how are you doing? And Darth Thrower, thank you for the 10 bits. Much appreciated. Good to see you. I used to have an IG army for a long time, and I didn't get rid of it because it was too expensive. I got rid of it because I realized I would never be able to paint that many models. It would just take me so long. And so I got rid of it, but it actually didn't cost me that much to get it. But it also depends on what you want. Like, if you want 100% Vostroyans, you're probably going to be shelling out the big bucks. Well, thanks, Darth. I'm here 4 p.m. every Thursday, at least for the time being. Depending on work, I may end up eventually having to change to a different time, but for now, 4 p.m. every Thursday, well, Central Time, 4 p.m. every Thursday. So you can come and check us out. And if you also like, just like tabletop wargaming in general, the stream also has a whole lot of that going on other days, usually Monday through Wednesday. So you should definitely check those out. They also do board games, even D&D in the evenings. So if you're into any of that other stuff, you can also check those out on Bell of Lost Souls. But I am one of the handful of people who does the hobby aspect of miniature gaming here. Well, yeah, there is that, how good it would be if you don't have any of the particularly strong, like, vehicles and so on. I actually don't know what's particularly strong in Imperial Guard right now. I haven't been keeping up with the competitive scene really at all, but particularly in regards to Imperial Guard. So, another thing about painting a camouflage scheme onto a vehicle is that you have to be kind of patient with applying the colors. You know, when you know you can just go in one solid coat and get that color pattern on there, you want to just apply thick paint and get it over with, but that's really not what you want to do. You want to be putting it on nice and thin and really establish the pattern you want first, and then go in and make sure that it's got the thickness that you want, or not thickness, the coverage that you want. The temptation is definitely big to get into a rush and try to get it done as fast as possible, but don't fall into that trap. Take it nice and careful, make sure your pattern looks how you want it to, and then go in and make sure that it has good coverage with the paints so that your colors are nice and solid. Alternatively, you can wait until you do your panel shading, because you're going to have to go and touch up the individual colors anyway once you do that. But you have to make sure your coverage is already good in the places where you're going to be doing the shading. So at least keep that in mind, because you can't go back and fix the coverage in places you just shaded. You'll ruin your shading if you do that. And you'll see what I'm talking about when we get around to shading. But the big thing, you know, make sure you have good coverage. Make sure your colors are nice and solid and nice and separated. Now, if you want to do like soft camouflage, I would consider getting an airbrush, because those are much better at soft transition camouflage than trying to do it by hand, which usually means dry brushing, and it can get very messy, and the results can be very very inconsistent trying to do it by dry brush. So I definitely recommend getting an airbrush for that, but it's not even necessary to have soft transition camouflage. Oh, yes, yes. Yeah, here CP can be very, or a very core part of how the IG does what it does now. And so they try to do everything they can to keep them or to gain them. Alright, Darth Thrower, take it easy. And, yeah, hopefully we'll see you next time. I don't know what the term soup means in regards to Imperial Guard. Oh, okay. Okay. Yeah. I've never liked that. I've never been a big fan of allies. Not because not necessarily because of its impact on the game itself, but because I don't like it thematically. I think armies look better when they're just purely one faction, or at least a set of factions that are very close thematically already. Like if they ever made like an ecclesiarchy force that did not, have Sisters of Battle already in it, Sisters of Battle would go really well with it. But it's not really a thing right now, so we've all been crossing our fingers for years that they'll actually do something neat with Sisters of Battle and take them seriously, but so far nothing on the horizon for that we've been made aware of. So one interesting thing about this NATO camouflage scheme, it's actually airbrushed on by machines in the factory, and so it actually is a soft camouflage scheme technically. But at this scale, actually, even if you look at pictures of the real vehicles, the transitions are so small that you don't actually see them at any kind of real distance, real viewing distance. You would have to be standing within, probably 5 or 6 feet of the tank itself to really actually be able to make out that there's an airbrush transition between the colors. And so effectively, at the ranges at which, people would be seeing this vehicle on a tabletop, or, in real life, 10 or 20 meters away, it appears to be hardline camouflage. And so there's absolutely nothing wrong with painting hard camouflage lines for these types of schemes. Yeah, it's sharing the keyword Imperium doesn't really, do a lot when half the armies in the game all have the faction word Imperium. It kind of gives one faction, being Imperium, way more flexibility than is probably warranted. But that was why, they got rid of allies. They had been in the game back in, what was it? I think it was 3rd edition they had introduced allies late in the game, in the edition. And they hated it so much they actually got rid of it completely in 4th edition. If I remember correctly. There was definitely an edition where, in response to negative views of Allied forces, they had completely gotten rid of it. But then, in the last few editions, they just brought it right back. And that's one of the things that sort of maybe not really take it all too seriously lately. I think they've been far too generous with the amount of flexibility they give people in making their army lists. At least with regards to taking allied detachments. Taudar, oh god. Alright, as you can see, the brown color is definitely a lot more fun. Certainly brings a lot more life to the camouflage scheme than the black-gray does. But the black-gray is an essential part of it, especially to the part of, you know, giving it a real viable camouflage scheme that breaks up its appearance, you know, from a distance. Yeah, and that's one thing that's good about GW now, is that they're willing to acknowledge that something is not working well in the game and that they need to change it, and they actually will fix it in a fairly quick amount of time. But I think the flexibility they've given to allies is going to prove to be more of a headache to them that they could have avoided simply by, you know, making it a little more rigid, a little less flexible in the first place. Like, for example, you know, one of the old ways that allies were sort of discouraged was that you could take them, but they actually cost more points. It would be more expensive for you to take. Like something like 25% more points for the unit versus its cost in the codex. And that was one way that people were able to bring things still, but usually for the sake of some kind of, you know, thematic purpose, and not to just find some kind of combo that the game designers did not expect to see brought out in the battlefield. Yeah, I think that would be, you know, honestly, that would be pretty neat. Like, anytime you you use something that did not have, like, your primary faction keyword, you know, like, if you were Imperials, and, yeah, exactly, soup armies are designed to min-max. I almost never see one that is not trying to min-max. Like, say I'm Grey Knights, and I want to bring, like, a unit of Primaris Space Marines or something for whatever reason. That should probably cost me a command point to do that. You know, there's got to be some kind of penalty, either in points cost or command points, and you know, to sort of discourage, yeah, the souping and min-maxing type armies. That's really one other reason why I don't really participate in the competitive side of the game. You know, I like playing the game when I get a chance, but I don't like playing really competitive because you see armies that just make no sense. You know, I mean, in the terms of, you know, winning a game in a tournament, yeah, they make sense, but in terms of, you know, looking like a cohesive force that has some kind of, you know, theme or purpose behind it, you know, sometimes you just see some wacky stuff and you're like, yeah, okay. You know, I mean, there are people who are asking, hey, so when are Eldar going to be allowed to take Primaris Marines as allies? Like, really? Come on, man. You got striking scorpions. Just learn how to play them. It's really simple. You paint them, you put them in a glass case, and then you take good units instead. I'm kidding, though. I mean, striking scorpions actually could be good now, but I haven't heard anybody talk about them from the new codex, or recent codex, to put it that way. Shining spears, yeah. Well, they certainly sound a lot faster. I have no idea what striking scorpions do now, though. Do they still have, well, whatever they call infiltrate nowadays? Yeah, I've heard that. Yeah, that the Reapers are really just, you know, everything else is just filler to either cover for or ensure that you can take your as many Reapers as possible. Sounds like Reapers are almost as good as they were in 2nd edition. Alright. So progress is slow, but it's coming along. And hopefully next time I'll have these guys progressed enough where I can show you guys the shading plan. But the things I want you to note are, you know, the amount of coverage that I'm going for. I want coverage and consistency, which sometimes is difficult. Some colors, you'll paint it on, it'll dry, you'll paint it on again to get some more coverage, and suddenly the second layer you add looks like a different color from the first one. That can sometimes happen with Vallejo paints, so whenever you're using those, make sure you shake the crap out of them, because they like to separate sometimes. And doing that will help prevent that from happening. Soul Burst. I'm not familiar with that ability. Is that something related to Dark Reapers now, or is that one of the new psychic abilities? Huh. Strength from death. I really don't know anything about the Inari stuff, except, you know, that they're sort of able to mix Dark Eldar and the other variety of Eldar, craft worlds and so on. Wow. If an enemy unit is like that, or one of your own? Either. Oh, jeez. So you're having trouble killing your enemy, just kind of throw away one of your units, and bam, there you go, buff. Good times. Ouch. It's funny, Dark Reapers are one of the first units I ever used in Warhammer 40k. The 2nd edition, and the store owner was setting up a demo game for me. He was going to play some Ultramarines, and he let me use some of his Eldar. And the Dark Reapers were just so nasty back then. They just decimated the Space Marines before they even got close to anything. Hey Crokeg, how you doing? Of course, back then, an army of Harlequins was basically like 5 or 6 models, and they just mauled everyone mercilessly. So even back then, out of the most insane things the Eldar had, the Dark Reapers were not rated high on that list. Now, though, I mean, Dark Reapers used to be pretty beast in 3rd edition, too. Not quite like now, but they were certainly very effective at putting down Marines or anything with an armor value of 3. Back when AP was the thing. It wasn't just a minus, it was this is the armor value you ignore. Yes, exactly. Yeah, the Harlequin's Kiss. Man, that thing was so disgusting. Oh, do you have a vehicle? Don't worry, I can easily penetrate that. Oh, you have wounds? Don't worry, I can make those go away. Yeah, the Harlequin's Kiss was really nasty. I think the only disadvantage it had is that it didn't have super long range. I can't remember what the range was. It was like 12 or 6 inches, maybe 18 at the most. Not that it mattered too much, because Harlequins were also super fast. But yeah, that's something Larry would know. He would know what the range of those things was back then. And if he didn't know off the top of his head, I bet you there's a book 10 feet away from him that will tell him what it was. Alright, that dried a little too quickly. I need to... There we go. The black gray I have on my pallet's starting to dry out a bit. Yeah, there was only one other weapon that was worse than the Harlequin's Kiss, and that was Drachnian, or whatever they call Abaddon's weapon. That thing was just so disgusting in 2nd edition. It was absolutely insane. if you hit with it, your opponent made a field save. If they had a field save, if they failed it, they died. If they didn't have a field save, they auto-died. If you hit a vehicle, you auto-penetrated. And since a lot of the times you didn't even have to roll to hit vehicles in many cases, you just walked Abaddon up to the vehicle and just penetrated it. But back then, in 2nd edition, characters were pretty insane. They were insanely powerful. Oh, how are we doing on focus here? There we go. Well, it's 5:30. We got an hour left. Let's switch gears. I'm gonna keep working on this scheme off stream. Try to get the basic pattern on here, and then next time we can look at how to properly shade this, which will usually be, which should be a lot faster. Oh yeah, Ragnar Blackmane was a beast. Ahriman was a beast. Like God, you just wanted to dominate someone's psychic phase and just ruin the whole psychic phase for everyone every game. You just take Ahriman, and you know you'd rush at him with like an army of 30 Termagants. And he would turn like half of them into Plague Bearers in one turn. And so now they're all bogged down trying to fight Plague Bearers instead of, you know, running at you. Yeah, there were some pretty disgusting things you could do in the Psychic phase back then, especially if you had really powerful Psychers. So yeah, we're gonna finish this scheme off stream, and I'll show you how we're gonna shade it. And then touch-ups, and then do a very light highlight on it. And that will be basically 90% of this vehicle completed. Then it's just, you know, doing some of the trim and stuff, and, you know, painting the different little things, like such as the smoke launchers on the turret and so on. And this guy will be done. And then I'll only have 6 others exactly like it to do. So good times, right? Alright, so let's get to our Death Guard for today. For our last hour we have left. This guy's little tabard needs some work here. The leather needs work. Let's change the focus here. There we go. So what our goal is to try to get to where this guy is, because I like how this turned out, and I think that's how we want to go with this one as well. We just gotta catch it up. Oh, the scheme on the other tank? Well, let's take a quick look at it. So the dry brush, I think I went a little too heavy on the highlighting dry brush, and so it turned out a little bit grainy. I want to try to do it much more subtly this time, you know, just sort of barely showing up, barely noticeable. But also, the way I shaded this one originally, let me take the turret off because this is how I did it originally. I put on the camouflage pattern. I then covered it in gloss varnish, and then I washed over that so that the Agrax Earthshade wash would tend to go more towards the recesses. And while it did succeed in doing that, and I didn't get any pooling of the wash anywhere, it did result in toning down the green color a little bit, like actually a lot more than I wanted, and sort of reduced the sharpness of the camouflage, which I thought I would like, but no, I actually kind of do like the sharpness of the camouflage. And so I've started working a little bit on the turret here. You can see this little area here. I've been slowly going over and repainting it a bit at a time, and adding panel shading as I go. And so you can even tell the difference in the black-gray between the part that was done with the Agrax Earthshade and the part that wasn't. Here I actually just did Agrax Earthshade in the panel lines and then went back and touched up, you know, the areas that I didn't want to be shaded. And so, yeah, you'll probably see a lot of difference when I actually finish redoing this one. But that may come later because right now I'm doing an Escalation League for this game, and I actually need more of these painted for it, and I don't need any of the Leopard 2s that I just showed you. So, yeah, that's why I sort of switched priorities. Rather than finishing the remake of the prototype, just to kind of work on it with a new model that I actually am going to be using soon. So, without any further delay, let's get to the Death Guard. Let me make sure I've got all the colors I need for this. Need our Mournfang Brown, need some Rhinox Hide. And what else? Screaming Skull, believe it or not. And I think Corn Red. Where are you at? There you are. Corn Red. And I see if there's anything else. Let's see. Mournfang Brown, Corn Red, Rhinox Hide, Screaming Skull, and yeah, there we go. And we're all set. First, let's finish the highlights on the first strip we were working on last week. Make sure my focus is good for this. Yep. This brush is giving me problems. Doesn't have great paint retention and flow, unfortunately. And I am planning on getting some new brushes soon. I just have to order them. And I think will improve the situation a lot. Yeah, thanks, Isendar. Yeah, I think he's coming along pretty well. I may add some more stuff to the tentacles, you know, in terms of highlights. But we'll see. That's something I can even do after I'm completely done with the model, is just go back some other time and make adjustments. And in the meantime, move on to other stuff. And then hopefully forget that I wanted to make adjustments so I don't actually have to do them. Alright, so might want to tone that down a little bit. We'll see. Let's try it. Yeah, so the orangey look is actually some of the highlights are done in a bronze flesh. Because if you sort of like, imagine if you shine like a really harsh light onto like something that's pink and fleshy, it'll sort of have a more washed out appearance. And so we're using a more like typical flesh highlight for the real extreme areas, or areas we want definition to really appear more than it normally would. Let me adjust the zoom a little, or adjust the focus a bit. So yeah, you can see here, I actually used a regular flesh color to highlight the areas where the pink sort of has little ridges and so on. Because otherwise, if you do it with a brighter pink, one, it doesn't look like really very fleshy anymore, and two, it doesn't really show up as much. And that's the one thing I may go and touch up later, is either add more of those or, just highlight other areas. But I want to wait until I'm done with everything else before I really decide whether I want to keep going with that. And that includes adding, the Nurgle's Rot to these little green pustules and so on. Which means the whole model will have to be done before I can really get around to that. But yeah. And I mean, even if they look kind of funky on this guy in the end, he's pretty much the only model in the Death Guard the Death Guard range that has this many tentacles sticking out of him. So alright, now let's water down things a bit. Oh yeah, oh yeah. When it looks like they literally just took two bolters and strapped them together, and that's your combi bolter now. All we did was put some little, like, I guess that's supposed to be a sight in the middle? I don't know. Yo dog, I strapped a bolter to your bolter so you can bolt while you bolt. And here we're just going to add little thin scratch marks everywhere. Alright, let me turn this so you can actually see it. That's a little... And then close to the edge, we want to add a few more scratches here and there. Doesn't look like much right now. This looks like sort of like he's got graffiti written on it. But you're going to see in a little bit how we're going to make these fit much better with this guy's tabard, or whatever you call a thing with leather straps hanging off of your belt. I don't really have a more accurate word for it I can think of right now. Yeah, no kidding. Yep, there's old leather, and then there's old leather on a Plague Marine. Like, it's already 10,000 years old, and plus, it's, you know, been in a realm where it's rotting at an alarming rate. Surprised that it can even hold together anymore. And it probably wouldn't if not for some weird space disease magic. Yes. It's what was that comic strip that I saw like not too long ago where each of the Chaos Gods was trying to seduce warriors to their cause, so they're telling them the advantages of becoming one of their followers. You know, Khorne is like, I can make you powerful enough to drink from the skulls of your enemies and bathe in rivers of your enemies' blood. You know, and Slaanesh is like, I can make you more desirable than any being and any mortal being imaginable. And, you know, Tzeentch's like, I can give you incredible magical powers. And, you know, Nurgle's like, I can make you really, really, really sick. Alright. So we're just going to start gradually adding a glaze to this of our original leather color. Looks like we may have gone a little too strong with our scratches, so I may have had to go too strong with my glazing. We'll see. We can always add more. Those are not as thin as we want. Alright. Yeah, I always imagine Tzeentch as the magic 8-ball god of chaos. Yeah, but I don't want to spend 10,000 years doing it. Alright, I think that's starting to work now. Ah! Alright, yeah, that's a lot better. Oh, that's already got plenty of rust. I actually added some rust pigment into it. It's probably hard to make out from here, though. Because I tried to make it so it didn't rust the whole thing. I wanted it to still look like it's made of links that are, you know, constantly shifting around, and so rubbing the rust off of the more prominent parts. Alright. Let's see if I can highlight these without messing things up. Yeah, no kidding. I really do. The place I looked at where I wanted to order them from because they're cheaper are like out of stock until late February, unfortunately. But I might still go with them anyway, just because they are cheaper. And late February is not bad anyway. I mean, that's, you know, it means I'd get them in about 4 weeks probably from now. I mean, I've been painting on this stream with these less than amazing brushes for a while now. We've gotten by. I can deal with another month. Alright, we're just about there. It's very minor. Glazing, and then add the final highlight. Touch this up a little bit, give us some more separation. Well, that's about where I'm at, Isendar, you know. In a position where I extol the virtues of having really good brushes every week, but I don't own any. Alright, I think we're there. Let's put it side by side with his brother. Yeah, the highlights are a little more extreme. I may go back and tone them down a little bit. But so far, I'm happy with it. They may also, once the paint's dried a little bit, it may not be quite so stark as it looks right now. So. And either way, individually, on its own, it still looks pretty good. Maybe a little bright with the highlights. We'll see. I'll always go back and bring them down a bit. Just like a little bit of a glaze. And now, I'm going to do some of this bronze. And do these little spikes down here. I like doing metal on these guys because it's easy. And actually a lot faster than probably any other step of doing these minis, honestly. While I'm waiting for that to dry, I'm gonna touch up the metal on the chainmail. And that's just going to be picking out some on the surface there. And that's it. Nice and easy. Alright. Now, the part that makes painting bronze on these minis so very easy. Ooh. Makes a very weird effect when I accidentally tap my camera. I'm just going in and out, but it looks really weird and wavy. Alright, we're going to take this Nylock oxide. Or however you pronounce that. Don't look at me, I don't speak Necrontyr, or whatever language that is. From the Warhammer universe. Yep, Nylock oxide works extremely well for any kind of bronze or brass color as a way of adding verdigris. And when you're a Plague Marine, you can bet your stuff is corroded, and so verdigris works perfectly. And the stuff actually dries surprisingly quickly, which is one reason you have to be a little bit careful when you're applying it, because you get it on something it's not supposed to be on. It's very difficult to remove it in time before it has set itself in place. You probably thin it out a bit more, though. I usually use it right out of the bottle, like a wash. But you may be able to thin it out, give it more control. Alright. So that is his tabard. And to be honest, he really doesn't have a whole lot left to do, you know, besides just touching up places that don't look quite right. But in terms of the overall look, like, all I really have to do is paint all the pustules and little indentations with some brown or Death Guard green, you know, whichever applies in the situation. We can go ahead and start doing that now, because we still have some time left in the stream. And then all of these things, both the pustules and the like little potholes or whatever you call them, all those are going to have Nurgle's Rot in them in the end. Something that I'm hoping will look good on the finished model. Keeping my fingers crossed. And for the pustules themselves, I'm going to paint them Death Guard green, because that's actually really close to the color of Nurgle's Rot. And so once I put on Nurgle's Rot, I won't have to put on multiple layers for it to have its color really stand out. And then for like the sort of seeping sores and holes in the armor, I still want the kind of, you know, brown color inside it to still be somewhat visible. So those I'm going to paint a dark brown and leave them like that, even when I put on the Nurgle's Rot, so it looks like the Nurgle's Rot is actually, you know, inside something that's dark. I don't know if I'm explaining it correctly, but you'll see once I actually do it. that's not good. I have a minor emergency here. So one thing about gloves, they get paint on them, everything else will too. They're there to make sure that the oil on your hands does not get onto the models. But sometimes unfortunately these bottles are not always very clean in opening and closing, and so accidents can happen. And right now we're trying to minimize the impact here, the amount of cleaning up I'm going to have to do and fixing. Luckily, this was a part of the tentacles that I wasn't entirely convinced I was happy with anyway. But yep. And to be honest, I should have been checking my gloves to make sure that they were clean enough to be handling certain parts of the model. That's alright though. It could be fixed pretty easily. Alright. So, I'll fix that eventually, but for now. Actually, let's go ahead and this is why it's always better to be careful than to be fast. An example of when going fast ends up slowing you down. So you have to go and fix things where you went too quickly and something careless happened. For now, we're just going to paint this our basic pink, and I'll get back to highlighting it later on. This guy's actually almost done, so the only thing left really for him is touch-ups anyway, so. Let's go back to our Death Guard green here. Really not a whole lot to do with it. Another part where touch-ups are going to be a big thing. White parts of the armor in general. But I'm not helping the situation by having little accidents. As if you'd noticed, there's a few of my lines separating the tentacles from the armor are still pretty thick, and that's because I haven't gotten around to the final touch-up for the armor where I get rid of those. And this being one example. Which is, believe it or not, actually the most labor-intensive thing I have left on this model to do, actually, is to do these touch-ups on the white, which I'm doing in Ushabti bone. Alright. It's a good first step on the pathway to recovery. Of course, there's only so much you can do with a Plague Marine. Alright, let's get some of the pits. That's the word I was looking for. Pits in his armor. It's a nice, easy part. Or even messing it up a little doesn't actually mess it up. Just mix some Mournfang Brown and Dryad Bark together. And then try and hit all the little pits in his armor. Some of which have already been started, but could use a little touch-up. I've already done some of this off-stream, I think. And this part, pretty much super easy. The only difficulty of it is making sure you found all the spots where you need to apply it. I'm also going over these little gouges in his armor. So obviously the paint is not going to hold up to being gouged. So we want to make sure that this brown color or chipping color comes through as well in those spots. And honestly, looking at the shape of the Nurgle symbol, I will kind of want to get some of this color in there to distinguish it from the armor. And then there's a few places here where I don't have chipping, but I feel like there should be chipping. So we're going to rectify that. Try to avoid having to hand paint chipping if I can. Yeah, that is true, Isendar. I already know that's going to happen. I fully anticipate that. Now here we go back, because you can't just add the chipping color if you do this by hand. You have to go back with your armor color and reapply it in a sort of spotty fashion. In order to make sure that the chips you added look right. I think I might have overdone that a little. There we go. Make sure we don't make the same mistake again. This rather sneaky Death Guard green bottle. See you, Kartoffelbauer. Take care. We're actually about to wrap up here, so... Take care, Isendar. Sunday? What's going on Sunday? Other than the Super Bowl. Are you guys actually live near each other? You gonna watch the game together? Oh, Dragon Slayer game. I don't know. I don't know if I'll be there or not. Hard to say at the moment. But I just might check it out. I'll at least probably try to pop in on the stream. Isendar is not American, but he does live in America. He's Australian. Yeah, they like to throw shrimps on the Barbie, which sounds horrific. Why would anyone want to burn their Barbie? But, you know. Oh, that's funny. Austrian. Yeah, that's funny. That's why when they ask you where you're from, just say Österreich. They won't confuse it then. They won't know what the hell you're talking about, but you know, at least they won't confuse you for an Australian. All right, guys. Well, it's been fun. That's all we got for today. We'll probably continue with all 3 projects on the next stream. So. You know, please tune in and check it out. And also, in about an hour and a half, we should have Thomas with his stream, Full of Monkey. Go Boy, also, if you don't know him normally as Thomas. Check him out. It's lots of fun. And Isendar, that's good. It's good. It was good seeing all of you. Take care, and I hope to see you next week.